My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 47 years old, divorced, and until 6 months ago, I lived in a quiet, middle-class apartment complex in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. I worked as a medical billing clerk for 13 years at the same practice. I've never been arrested. Never even had a parking ticket. I pay my taxes early every year. I volunteer at church twice a month, helping with the food pantry. I'm not dramatic. I don't exaggerate. I don't start conflicts or make scenes. And I never imagined I'd be telling a story like this about my own parents. But the night my apartment burned down and my mother said those 3 words, "Not our problem," something inside me changed forever. What happened after that wasn't revenge. It wasn't me being vindictive or cruel. It was simply the truth catching up with people who thought they'd never face consequences. The flames were still licking the windows of my 3rd-floor apartment when I managed to dial my parents' number with shaking hands. I was standing barefoot on the freezing parking lot pavement, wearing nothing but pajamas and a thin bathrobe someone had thrown over my shoulders. Smoke filled my lungs every time I took a breath. Sirens screamed from every direction as more fire trucks arrived. My entire life was burning 30 feet above me. Every photograph, every piece of furniture I'd saved for, every memory of the last 15 years since my divorce. The phone rang 3 times before my mother answered, her voice irritated at being woken at 2 in the morning. "What is it, Evelyn?" she said without even greeting me. I could barely form words. "Mom, my apartment is on fire. Everything's burning. I don't have anywhere to go. I need..." She cut me off before I could finish. "Evelyn, you're 47 years old. This isn't our problem." The words hit me harder than the smoke had. I heard my father's voice in the background, muffled but clear enough. "What does she want now?" My mother spoke to him, not bothering to cover the phone. "Her apartment's on fire or something. She wants to come here." There was a pause, then my father's voice came through louder. "Tell her we've got the guest room rented out on Airbnb this week. Besides, she's made her choices. She needs to handle her own problems." My mother came back on the line. "You heard your father. We can't help you right now. Try calling your sister." Then she hung up. I stood there holding my phone, staring at the screen in disbelief as firefighters shouted instructions behind me. The cold bit through my thin clothing. Ash fell around me like snow. And I realized with stunning clarity that I was completely alone. Then I heard one firefighter turn to another, their voices carrying in the chaos. "This doesn't look accidental," he said, studying the pattern of flames. "See how it's burning in 2 places?" By morning, everything I owned had been reduced to charred rubble and water-damaged debris. The Red Cross had given me a voucher for 3 nights at a cheap motel, but after that, I'd be on my own. I tried calling my sister Brenda twice. Both calls went to voicemail. I left messages explaining what happened, asking if I could stay with her for a few days while I figured things out. She never called back. When I tried my parents again, hoping the shock of the night before had worn off, I discovered they'd blocked my number. The calls wouldn't even go through. That afternoon, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, trying to decide if I could afford a motel after the Red Cross voucher ran out or if I'd be sleeping in my back seat. I'd lost my laptop in the fire, which meant I couldn't work remotely. My clothes were gone. My identification and important documents were ash. I had the pajamas I'd been wearing and the robe. That was it. Everything else was burned or melted or destroyed by water from the fire hoses. The landlord, a man named Frank Dobson who owned 3 buildings in town, approached me while I sat in my car. He was in his 60s, always wore polo shirts tucked into khaki pants, always drove a new Cadillac. He'd owned my building for 8 years. We'd always had a cordial relationship. I paid rent on time, never complained, kept my apartment clean. But something about his expression as he walked toward me felt wrong. Too composed. Too rehearsed. "Terrible thing," he said, shaking his head. "Just terrible. But don't worry, insurance will handle everything." The way he said it felt mechanical, like he'd practiced the line. "When can I get my things?" I asked. "Whatever survived, I mean. There might be some items that..." "Buildings condemned," he interrupted. "Nothing salvageable. Fire department won't let anyone inside. Too dangerous." He handed me a business card. You'll need to file a renter's insurance claim. And we'll need to discuss lease termination. Then he walked away before I could ask anything else. I sat there holding his card, confused by the interaction. Something felt off. As I was trying to figure out what bothered me, someone knocked on my car window. A woman in a fire department uniform stood beside my car. She handed me a business card through the cracked window. "Fire Investigator Thomas Hale wants to speak with you," she said. "He'll be in his office tomorrow morning at 9. It's important." I took the card, my hands starting to shake. Why does an investigator want to talk to me? The woman's expression was carefully neutral. Standard procedure in cases like this. He'll explain everything tomorrow. Then she walked away, leaving me sitting there with a growing sense of dread. Cases like this. What did that mean? I looked at the card. Thomas Hale, Fire Investigation Unit, Columbus Regional Fire Department. A phone number and an address downtown. I'd never been investigated for anything in my life. The idea that I might be suspected of burning down my own apartment made me feel sick. But I couldn't afford not to cooperate. If they thought I'd committed arson, they could press charges. I could go to jail. I spent that night in the motel room the Red Cross had paid for, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what was happening to my life. The next morning, I sat across from Investigator Hale in a small, sterile office that smelled like coffee and printer ink. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "There were 2 points of origin for the fire," he said, sliding photos across the desk toward me. "Here and here." He pointed to burned areas in what had been my living room and my bedroom. "The pattern suggests accelerant was used." My stomach dropped. "Accelerant? You mean like gasoline? Or something similar?" He watched my reaction carefully. The fire spread much faster than it should have in a residential building with working smoke detectors and sprinkler systems. Someone made sure this building burned. I couldn't breathe. "You think I did this? Why would I burn down my own home? I lost everything." Hale held up his hand. "I'm not accusing you of anything. But I need to ask, who benefits if you lose everything?" The question caught me off guard. I sat there trying to think. Who would benefit from me being homeless and destitute? I couldn't come up with an answer, so Hale moved on to other questions. Did I have enemies? Had I been in any conflicts with neighbors? Did I owe anyone money? Was I behind on rent? The answer to everything was no. I'd lived quietly, worked steadily, kept to myself. The only conflict I'd had in years was with my parents, and that was just the usual family tension, nothing that would explain arson. When Hale asked about my relationship with the landlord, I mentioned that Frank had seemed oddly calm about the fire, almost eager to discuss lease termination. "Frank Dobson," Hale repeated, making a note. "He's owned the building how long?" 8 years, I think. Maybe 9. "And he approached you yesterday?" "What exactly did he say?" I repeated the conversation as best I could remember. The way Frank had insisted nothing was salvageable, the strange comment about insurance handling everything. Hale's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He was interested now. "One more thing," he said. "Did you ever have problems with the electrical system in your apartment? Faulty wiring, overloaded outlets, anything like that?" I thought about it carefully. No. The only electrical problem I reported was exterior wiring near the dumpsters. The light kept flickering and the outlet looked burned. I sent emails to the building management about it for weeks, but they never fixed it. Hale made another note. "I'll need copies of those emails." I nodded. "They're on my laptop, which burned. But they should still be in my email account. I can access it from the library." As I left Hale's office, my phone rang. It was Frank Dobson. "We need to discuss your lease violation," he said without greeting. "What violation?" "I've never violated my lease." "The space heater. Section 8, Clause 4 clearly states no auxiliary heating devices due to fire risk. You had a space heater that caused the fire." My blood went cold. "I never owned a space heater." "I don't know what you're talking about." "The fire investigator found remnants of one in your bedroom. You're liable for the damages, Evelyn. We'll be pursuing legal action." He hung up before I could respond. I stood on the sidewalk, trying to understand. Someone had planted a space heater in my apartment. Someone was framing me. I called Hale immediately and told him about Frank's accusation. He listened without interrupting, then said something that made my skin crawl. The landlord increased the building's insurance coverage 3 weeks ago. Doubled the payout for total loss. The implications hung in the air between us. You think he burned down his own building? I whispered. I think someone did. And I think they're trying to make it look like your fault. He paused. Mrs. Harper, I need you to think very carefully. Is there anyone who would benefit from both you being displaced and the building being destroyed? Anyone with connections to the landlord? I started to say no, but then something my father had said the night of the fire echoed in my memory. She needs to handle her own problems. But before that, before my mother even told him about the fire, I'd heard him say something else. Something that hadn't registered in my shock and desperation. At least the building will finally be renovated. How did he know about the building? And why would he say that? I drove to my parents' house that afternoon, determined to confront them face to face. They lived in a modest ranch home in a neighborhood they'd been in for 30 years. I'd grown up in that house, had countless memories there. But as I pulled into the driveway, those memories felt contaminated by something I couldn't quite name yet. My mother answered the door but didn't invite me in. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, blocking my entry like I was a solicitor trying to sell something. What do you want, Evelyn? I want to know why you said what you said. Why you turned me away when I had nowhere to go. She sighed like I was being dramatic. You're a grown woman. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet instead of always running to us when things get hard. My apartment burned down. Everything I owned is gone. That's not things getting hard. That's a crisis. And you survived. You're here, aren't you? Maybe this is a lesson about independence. Her words were so cold, so calculated. This wasn't just indifference. This felt like something planned. Then my father appeared behind her in the hallway. Is she still here? My father said, not even looking at me directly. Harold, she's asking about the fire. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication that made my mother's jaw tighten. My father finally met my eyes. What about it? You said something strange the night it happened. You said, at least the building will finally be renovated. Why would you say that, Dad? How did you even know about the building? He blinked, his expression shifting from annoyance to something more guarded. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I heard you. Before Mom even told you what was happening, you mentioned renovation. My mother stepped forward. You need to leave now, Evelyn. You're not welcome here. Not until Dad explains. Your father doesn't owe you any explanations. Now go. She closed the door in my face. I stood there on the porch, my mind racing. There was something here, something connecting my father to the building. I just couldn't see it yet. Over the next few days, I started digging. I'd lived in this small town my entire life except for a brief period after college. Everyone knew everyone. If my father had connections to Frank Dobson, someone would know about it. I started at the local diner where my father ate breakfast every Saturday morning, a routine he'd had for decades. The waitress, a woman named Constance who'd worked there for 20 years, remembered me from when I was a teenager. Your dad still comes in, she said, refilling my coffee. Every Saturday like clockwork. Sometimes meets friends. What friends? I asked casually. Oh, you know, the usual crowd. Sometimes that landlord fellow Frank something. They play golf together. My heart started pounding. Frank Dobson. That's the one. They've been thick as thieves lately. Always hunched over papers, talking about permits and zoning, and I don't know what all. Planning something big, from the sound of it. I thanked her and left, my mind spinning. My father and Frank were golf buddies. They'd been meeting regularly, discussing permits and zoning. Why would my father care about permits for a building he didn't own? At the county clerk's office, I spent hours searching through public records, property records, building permits, development applications. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew I'd recognize it when I saw it. And then I did. A redevelopment application for 447 Maple Street, my apartment building. The application was for demolition and new construction. Luxury condominiums, 12 units, Estimated property value 3 times the current assessment. The application had been filed 4 days after my apartment burned. 4 days. But that wasn't the detail that made my hands shake as I held the document. Listed as the general contractor for the proposed development was my father's construction company, Harper & Sons Construction. My father stood to profit from the building being destroyed, and he'd filed the paperwork before the ashes were even cold. I called Investigator Hale from the parking lot and told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Harper, I need you to come back to my office and bring copies of everything you just found." An hour later, I sat across from him again, watching him review the documents with increasingly tight lips. "Your father's company has been struggling financially," Hale said, pulling up information on his computer. "They nearly filed for bankruptcy 18 months ago. Took out massive loans to stay afloat." He turned the screen toward me, showing financial records he'd obtained through the investigation. Red numbers everywhere. If this condo development happens, the profit would save his business. But there's a problem. What problem? The building had long-term tenants with rent control protections. They couldn't be evicted without cause. And the existing building was structurally sound, no legitimate reason to condemn it. He paused. "A fire changes everything. Insurance pays out. Tenants are displaced. Building gets condemned. Perfect opportunity for redevelopment." The implications crashed over me like a wave. "You think my father burned down the building?" "I think someone did. And the timing is very convenient for Harper & Sons Construction." But suspicion wasn't proof. Hale explained that to move forward, he needed concrete evidence. The financial motive was compelling, but circumstantial. We needed something solid. That's when he showed me my lease. "This was filed with the building's insurance company," he said, sliding the document across his desk. "Notice anything unusual?" I scanned the familiar pages. It looked like the lease I'd signed 2 years ago when I'd renewed. Then I got to page 4 and saw it. An amendment dated 6 months ago. It removed all tenant relocation protections and disaster assistance clauses. According to this document, if the building became uninhabitable, the landlord had no obligation to help displaced tenants. "I never signed this," I said, my voice shaking. "That's not my signature." Hale pointed to the bottom of the page. "Look closer." I did. The signature looked like mine. Similar handwriting, same general shape. But it was slightly off. The E in Evelyn was too rounded. The H in Harper had the wrong slant. "Someone forged my signature," I whispered. "Who has access to documents with your real signature?" "My father." My father had tax documents, old family paperwork, years of letters and cards I'd signed. He could have traced or copied my signature easily. With Hale's permission, I confronted Frank Dobson directly. I found him at his real estate office, a small storefront downtown with faded photos of properties in the window. He was surprised to see me, but tried to hide it with a forced smile. "Mrs. Harper, what can I do for you?" I pulled out a copy of the forged lease amendment and laid it on his desk. "This signature isn't mine. It's forged. And I want to know who added this to my lease." The color drained from his face. He picked up the document with shaking hands, studied it, then set it down carefully. I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Someone changed my lease 6 months ago to remove protections. Someone who knew that building was going to burn." His hands were trembling now. "You need to talk to your father." Not a denial. Not outrage at the accusation. Just fear. Raw, obvious fear. "Why do I need to talk to my father, Frank?" "Because Frank stopped himself, his jaw clamping shut. "I can't. I won't. Just talk to Harold." Then he practically ran from his own office, leaving me standing there holding the forged document. The insurance investigators called me in 2 days later. They'd been conducting their own parallel investigation, and now all the threads were starting to weave together. A woman named Adrienne Moss led the interview. She was professionally sympathetic but clearly suspicious. "Mr. Dobson has made certain claims about you," she said. "He states that you complained repeatedly about electrical issues in your apartment for months before the fire. He's provided emails allegedly from you describing sparking outlets, flickering lights, burning smells." "That's not true," I said firmly. I complained about exterior wiring near the dumpsters, not in my apartment. And I have proof. I'd spent the previous evening at the library downloading every email I'd sent to the building management. I handed over printed copies showing dated complaints about the exterior electrical box, complete with photos I'd attached showing scorched outlet covers and exposed wiring outside the building. Adrian reviewed them carefully. These directly contradict Mr. Dobson's claims. Because he's lying. He's trying to blame me for a fire someone else set. I paused, then made a decision. I think my father was involved. And I think I can prove it. The next confrontation happened at my father's construction company office. I showed up unannounced, walked past the receptionist who tried to stop me, and found my father in his private office reviewing blueprints. He looked up, startled, then angry. You can't just barge in here, Evelyn. We need to talk about the fire. I have nothing to say about your apartment. About the building you're contracted to redevelop. The one that conveniently burned down right before you filed demolition permits. His face went hard. Get out. Not until you tell me the truth. Did you burn down my building to save your company? He stood up, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You're embarrassing this family. If you keep pushing this nonsense, you'll regret it. We've been patient with your drama, but there are limits. That was the moment I stopped feeling hurt by my parents' rejection. That was the moment the pain transformed into something else. Focus. Determination. Clarity. Was I supposed to die in that fire? I asked quietly. My father's face flickered with something. Surprise, maybe guilt, but he recovered quickly. Don't be ridiculous. Now leave before I call security. I left. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Investigator Hale called me 3 days later with news. We found security footage from a shop 2 buildings down from yours. The camera angle caught part of the alley behind your building. My hands gripped the phone tighter. And a truck was parked there the night of the fire. 2:15 to 2:40 a.m. Right around when the fire started. Can you see the license plate? Better. We can see the company logo on the door. He paused. Harper and Sons Construction. The evidence was mounting, but it still wasn't enough. We needed someone to break, to confess, to provide direct testimony. That person turned out to be someone I'd never expected. One of my father's employees, a young man named Kyle Brennan who'd worked for Harper and Sons for 3 years, contacted me through Facebook. His message was brief. I need to talk to you about the fire. I quit 2 weeks before it happened. I think I know why. We met at a coffee shop far from town, where nobody would recognize us. Kyle looked nervous, kept checking over his shoulder like he expected someone to burst in. I was told to rewire the basement electrical panel in your building, Kyle said, his voice low and shaky. Your dad said the landlord wanted an upgrade but didn't want to pay for permits or inspections. Said to just do it quick and dirty. My stomach turned. What did you do? I followed orders at first. But the work they wanted me to do, it was dangerous. Overloading circuits, bypassing safety features. I told your dad it was a fire hazard. He said not to worry about it, that it was temporary. Kyle wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. I quit because I didn't want to be responsible when something went wrong. I thought they were just cutting corners to save money. But now your building burned down, and I keep thinking, was I part of setting it up to fail? I felt cold all over. Did you tell the fire investigator this? Not yet. I'm scared. Your dad knows where I live. He's got connections in this town. Kyle, people could have died in that fire. If what you're saying is true, my father and Frank Dobson committed arson. You have to tell the truth. He was quiet for a long time, then finally nodded. Okay, I'll talk to the investigator. But you have to promise they'll protect me. I promised, though I wasn't sure I could deliver on it. With Kyle's testimony, the investigation accelerated. Hale brought in state police and federal investigators because of the insurance fraud implications. My sister Brenda finally called me back, but not to apologize or offer support. Mom and Dad are a mess, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? What I'm doing? I lost everything in a fire that Dad might have caused. That's insane conspiracy thinking. Dad would never. Then why did he file development permits 4 days after the fire? Why was his truck parked behind the building that night? Why did one of his employees quit because he was ordered to create fire hazards? Silence. Then Brenda said something that made my blood run cold. You need to drop this, Evelyn. Just drop it and move on. Why? Why should I drop it? More silence. Then quietly, because we invested. Martin and I. We put money into the condo development. If this falls apart, we lose everything. My sister had known. Maybe not about the fire specifically, but about the development plan. She'd invested in profiting from my displacement, and now she was begging me to protect her investment by letting my father get away with arson. I hung up on her. Investigator Hill arranged for me to make a recorded phone call to my father. I sat in a police interview room with recording equipment and federal agents listening through the door. My hands shook as I dialed. My father answered on the third ring. What do you want, Evelyn? I want to understand why you did this to me. Did what? I haven't done anything to you. You've done this to yourself with your paranoid accusations. The building, Dad. Why did you need it to burn down? I don't know what you're talking about. His voice was controlled, careful. But I could hear the strain underneath. The company was failing. You needed a big project to survive. The condo development would save you. Lots of companies take on development projects. That doesn't mean... You were supposed to move out next year anyway, he said suddenly, his voice sharp. When your lease expired. This just sped things up. You would have been fine if you just accepted our help afterward, but you had to make everything difficult. You always make everything difficult. He caught himself too late. There was a long silence on the line as he realized what he'd said. He'd just admitted knowledge of plans for me to move out. Plans that predated the fire. Plans that implied foreknowledge. Dad, I started, but the line went dead. He'd hung up. The federal agent stepped into the room, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. That's enough, she said. We have what we need. 2 days later, on a cold Tuesday morning, I watched from my motel room window as police cars and federal vehicles surrounded my parents' house. My phone buzzed constantly, texts from numbers I didn't recognize, calls from my sister screaming at me. Messages from distant relatives demanding to know what I'd done. At 8:15 a.m., my father and Frank Dobson were both arrested for conspiracy, arson for profit, insurance fraud, and reckless endangerment. The charges were extensive. The evidence was overwhelming. By 9 a.m., my mother called me. Not from her blocked number, but from a neighbor's phone because hers had been seized as evidence. She was crying, her voice broken and raw. Why would you do this to your own family? She sobbed. How could you destroy us like this? I sat on the edge of the motel bed, listening to her cry, and felt nothing. No guilt. No regret. Just empty. The trial took 8 months to begin. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching my father refuse to look at me. The prosecution laid out a methodical case. Financial desperation. The development deal. Kyle's testimony about the dangerous wiring. Security footage of my father's truck. The forged lease amendment. The suspicious timing of insurance policy changes. Phone records showing dozens of calls between my father and Frank in the weeks before the fire. And finally, my recorded call where my father had essentially admitted foreknowledge. The defense tried to argue that everything was circumstantial, that the wiring work was legitimate maintenance, that the development application was opportunistic but not criminal. But then the prosecutor revealed something I hadn't known. Something that changed everything. The fire had spread faster than my father and Frank had calculated because they'd miscalculated the building's ventilation system. The way they'd altered the wiring had created a perfect accelerant pathway. If 3 tenants hadn't been visiting family that night, if I hadn't been a light sleeper who woke to smoke, people would have died. The building had 18 residents. Families. Children. And my father had been willing to risk all of them. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. My father was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Frank Dobson got 8 years. Both were ordered to pay massive restitution to the displaced tenants and to the insurance company they'd tried to defraud. The condo development never broke ground. The property was sold at auction to cover legal fees and restitution payments. My sister lost her entire investment. Harper and Sons Construction filed for bankruptcy. The company my grandfather had built and my father had run for 30 years ceased to exist. My mother sent me one final message 6 months after the sentencing, from the small apartment she'd moved into after they lost the house. We need help. Your father is appealing. The lawyer fees are destroying us. You got your restitution money. Surely you can spare something for your family. I read the message 3 times, sitting on the porch of a small house I'd purchased using the restitution funds and insurance settlement. It was modest, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Truly mine. I typed out my response carefully, making sure every word was exactly what I meant. I'm 47 years old. This isn't my problem. Then I blocked her number and went inside to make dinner. For the first time in my life, I meant it. And for the first time in my life, I was free.